we have a very special guest. Morgan, you were just introducing us to David Gornoski as we went to break and asking an important question about a theory that he studies.
Yeah, and so what I'd like to do is let David kind of take it away. David, can you explain to us at a big picture level the concept of mimetic theory?
Yeah, René Girard was he passed away in 2015. He was a professor at Stanford University, and he was a French American, and he developed a theory that would be considered kind of a throwback for his time in academia. When he came onto the scene, it was very popular to do deconstruction, where nothing has any objective meaning. There is no intrinsic meaning to anything, to any piece of text, to any story, to any novel. And what René Girard did is he said, "Look, I see meaning all over these texts. I see." He started teaching the great works of Western novels, and he noticed there was a pattern of human behavior in each one of the greatest novels. They all had the same kind of underlying structure. And he was like a detective looking to see, well, why is this same pattern of human behavior and conflict found in all these different works of literature? And eventually it led him into the world of mythology, where he started reading archaic mythological texts and stories from ancient times past. And he noticed a similar structure was going on there. And so he was trying to unify all these different texts to find out what's going on with human beings, that whenever our greatest geniuses write down stories that reflect us, they all have the same patterns. And that's what he came up with, mimetic theory. And mimetic theory is a very practical theory. It's something that folks like, the billionaire Peter Thiel, he used that to invest in Facebook. He put $100,000 into a young Mark Zuckerberg and turned it into a few $1 billion, one of the best investments in history. That was inspired because, according to Peter Thiel, he studied under René Girard, and he understood the mimetic theory gave him insight into how human beings operate. And that insight is that human beings, we copy the desires of our neighbors. We don't just do rote imitation like, transparently easy ones to see, like stick a tongue out and somebody else sticks a tongue out. We also copy the perceived desires that our neighbors have. So if we see that our neighbor has a Cadillac, maybe we got to get a Cadillac too. And if we see that our neighbor wears all black and that's pretty cool looking, then we got to wear all black too. Or if we see our neighbor has a certain type of house style, Mediterranean design, we've got to get that too, or do something better than that. And that's what we always do. We're keeping up with the Joneses, but the problem with human beings is we imitate like masters. Mm-hmm. Animals don't imitate to the same level that humans do. But that imitation can oftentimes be caught up in a negative feedback loop when we start imitating hostilities and aggression. It's very hard to get humans to stop once they get caught up in a rivalry with someone. With animals, when a wolf loses to the alpha wolf, the wolf will submit its neck to the alpha wolf for the wolf to strike the final blow, and there is no final strike typically.
Yeah.
There's just submission. But humans, if you kill my dog, then I kill your family, then your friends will kill my tribe, and then what's left of my tribe will fight generationally to defeat your kingdom, and it just never ends. That's the nature of human conflict. It's just mimetic, imitational aggression that can spiral out of control.
Now, is there a normative aspect to mimetic theory? I mean, is there some... does it give us some kind of an idea of what we should be doing different, or should we be working not to try to imitate each other so much? Is there a normative piece of the theory?
Yeah, you're always going to imitate, and what we have to foster in human relationships, especially in this time where things start to frazz apart, is that you've got to be able to find good, positive role models that are not giving people a model of jealousy and envy and pride and aggression and all the things that draw us into eternal conflicts. So, that's where Jesus comes into the situation, because René Girard found that it was Jesus that provided the reversal of the bad cycle of imitating negatively. That Jesus, when he said, imitate me, and what does he do? He washes the feet of those who are beneath him. And he he forgives his enemies. He says, how many times should we forgive? 70 times 7. We haven't learned that lesson. We have people in prison, languishing in prison for life sentences for, selling marijuana, and they don't get any forgiveness. They don't get 70 times 7 forgiveness. They get nothing because we don't imitate Jesus when we vote. We don't imitate Jesus. We go to church and we say our prayers, and when we keep it kind of in our pocket. But what Rene Girard found is that, no, society is going to fall apart if we don't understand Jesus' message, which is that, you have to imitate someone who, like him, he does not boast as an egomaniac like everybody else. Mm-hmm. If you want to imitate Karl Marx will tell you to tear down the whole, structure of society and rebuild it. If you want to imitate John Maynard Keynes, he'll say, in the end, we're all dead, so let's just destroy people's wealth in the future. Mm-hmm. So you imitate all these great figures of history, they'll always lead you into violence and imitation, which leads to conflict. But with Jesus, he ends that. He ends that when you imitate his way of living.
When you were talking about first explaining how mimetic desire works, I'm thinking, okay, I gotcha, because it's all about style, hairstyles, clothing trends, nail polish, everything. That's kind of, rang true for me. But I want you to go on to the next step of it and how the scapegoat mechanism plays into all of this.
Yeah, sure. That's what happens. We notice this all the time that, whenever you have people imitating, it creates almost like a contagion of imitation. It's almost like a disease. We catch the bug. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was in high school, you'd see that sometimes one table, 2 people would start fighting over what? Usually maybe a girlfriend or something. And before you know it, this was public school, the whole lunchroom was up in a fight, throwing chairs and everybody. It's like contagiously spreading to everywhere. So, you got to think about, if that's the way human beings are, that unlike, wolves where they'll stop, humans just keep going, tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. How are we still here? How come we haven't wiped out our species by now? Especially in the earlier stages when things were much more visceral and violent and brutal. And the reason is that human beings stumbled onto a way to divert their aggression towards each other into a common enemy. Mm-hmm. So if everybody's imitating everybody else, if I'm pointing my finger at you and you're pointing your finger back at me, we're imitating. But then as we look around, we say, you know what? I think that person over there, she's a witch. She's making us feel like, we've got problems with each other. It's actually her. She put a spell on us. Or you point to the guy over there and say, that guy's a monster. Look how he looks different. He's disfigured, or he has something different about him. And that's what ancient communities would do. They would, in a sea of sameness, they would latch on to someone with some kind of arbitrary difference, and they would all imitate each other by pointing fingers in the same direction. Instead of at each other, they point in one direction, and they say, this person is the one that caused our problems. And they destroy that person. And when they destroy or banish that person from the community, there's peace. There's catharsis. That's what you see when you go to the movie theater and you watch a bad guy get thrown down the cliff or something. You say, wow, all right, all of our problems are restored. The bad guy got his just dessert. He's got his justice. That's a piece of what people felt on a much more visceral level, much more deep level in our ancient community past. Whenever they would scapegoat a common enemy, say, oh, now we've solved our problems. And then what happens is you do that enough times, and then there becomes an oral tradition that says, hey, whenever we have a famine, or whenever we have a plague, like a coronavirus or something, we're going to come together and we're going to sacrifice someone to the gods, because the gods taught us that whenever there's a crisis and we're about to tear each other apart, just look for a sacrifice, and the sacrifice will be the one that brings us together. That's where we have, that's where ancient religion came from.
And we see in some of that, and we're down to what have we got, about a minute, Pat George? I think about a minute. Yeah,
we got
about a minute left, but in this segment. But we're seeing some of that, I think, kind of play out in some of the crowd psychology that we're seeing in some of these protest/riot movements. Aren't we, to a degree, are we Are we not seeing the scapegoating of law enforcement on a wide scale, that if we could just get rid of these people, if we could just get rid of the police, that everything would be good again and would be back to normal, and the police are the others? Is that how you would read the situation, David?
Yeah, kind of. But what Rene Girard shows and what the Bible reveals is that Jesus broke the scapegoat mechanism that we've been using. And so now these riots are an example of how the scapegoat machine doesn't work. So we can talk about that.
Okay, so we'll talk about that. We'll get into some of that, the Jesus personhood revolution. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's where I wanted to go next, with understanding your unique philosophy and the way that you come at analyzing the news and events of the day, which I just find fascinating and very refreshing, David. Thank you for being on with us. So we'll jump back into that when we come back in the next segment of the Morgan Streetman Show. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.